Hey everyone, I'm Nate Lambert with Red River, and today we're going to talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication, what it is, why you should be using it, and how it can keep you more secure when using your critical accounts. All right, so taking a look quickly at multi-factor authentication today, or MFA as it's known, something that's pretty common and I think is kind of something we're all familiar with, at least even if we don't know it, right? We're probably using it. But what we want to talk about a little bit is what it is and why you should be kind of working it into as many of your workflows and applications as possible, right? First off, then, what is MFA or multi-factor authentication? So from a technical definition perspective, right, MFA is an electronic authentication method in which users are granted access to a digital asset, interface, website, only after successfully presenting two or more pieces of evidence to the ultimate authentication mechanism. Now, I know that definition's got a lot of language in there. There's a lot of nomenclature. We're going to talk a little bit about what all those things mean. And as I said at the top, most of you are probably using multi-factor authentication in some aspect of your life, either through your banking account or your work accounts, but you probably could be using it in more places. So that's why we want to talk about its importance. But we'll first start with kind of explaining what all of that means, right? So when we say evidence, when we're dealing with MFA, what we're really talking about are the factors, right? So if we just think of the terminology, right, multi-factor authentication, what that typically means is that you have multiple pieces of evidence, right? So evidence are classified by three kind of distinct things, really common within the industry. The first being something you know. This is what you typically think of, right? Passwords, date of birth, last five of your, four of your social security number. All of those things are kind of things that you and you alone should potentially know in a perfect world. But as we've discussed in some of our other video series about security, passwords oftentimes can be a little less secure because they could be inadvertently shared, or if you're not following the Red River best practice standards for passwords, if you haven't seen that video yet, maybe your password is really simple, right? It's your middle name and your birthday. So somebody, a potential malicious entity, could identify that pretty quickly. So something isn't always the most secure, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The second most common factor would be something that you have. This is really the most common secondary factor. So this is, I know my password, but I also have my cell phone in my hand because it's my cell phone. And on that cell phone, I have a piece of software that's going to ask me for a code or make me select a button when I'm logging into something. So when you think of that multi-factor authentication, usually we're talking about something you have and something you know as the two primary factors that we're dealing with. But just for everyone's kind of edification, there is a something you are factor, right? This is when we deal with things like biometrics, so fingerprint readers, retinal scanners, some of the more futuristic and sci-fi kind of authentication methods. Those can also be considered as a secondary factor, right? So perhaps I need to put my thumbprint on something and then type in a password if you're working in a highly secure environment. So any combination of those factors or pieces of evidence could ultimately be contributing to a multi-factor, assuming that I have at least two of them, right? So why would we want to use multi-factor authentication? Let's start there. So first off, based on a study that Google did back in 2017, I would estimate that these numbers are a little higher now, but about 250,000 web credentials on average are stolen each week. If you've been following this web series, right, that can come through bad certificates, sort of man-in-the-middle type attacks. That can come through phishing attempts. But on average, there are about 250,000 credentials that are stolen every week, which is a lot. And for most of us, we are using passwords in multiple places, and multiple services are using those same passwords, which makes us even more vulnerable. So another reason to use multi-factor authentication is because we have so many consolidated applications and access. When you think about something like your Google account, that could have access to your YouTube account, your email, your calendar, potentially to photos. Like, people are using consolidated software platforms for so many things nowadays. So you have to be extra careful, because if you get access to one of those things, now somebody's got access to all of them. And then the third real reason that we would want to use it is just because passwords alone just aren't secure enough, as we've discussed, right? Either you're not following password security best practices, or you have to change them frequently due to your policy at work, so you're writing them down. All these kind of things that we all know aren't best practice, but they just happen, right? Life happens. So adding a secondary factor to your authentication is just really, really a solid idea. The positives for why we would want to use it would be that Microsoft itself considers MFA nearly 100% effective. Now, nothing is ever 100%, but what it means is that it's really, really challenging for someone to have both a combination of something you have and something you know, or something you are, right? So when we think about logging into your Apple ID on your phone, if you're using the face scanner and you need a password, it'd be pretty hard if someone took your phone to then also have your face, right? Because then you'd be there. So it is a highly effective security mechanism. And out of all the things you're going to come in contact with from a security perspective, MFA is one of the simplest, easiest ones to kind of implement in your life that's very, very highly effective. So then a Verizon study from a few years ago showed that about 80% of the breaches out there were caused by bad passwords or stolen passwords. And if any of those accounts that had multi-factor authentication enabled on them, then that stealing of that password or that cracked, weak password, it wouldn't have had really any impact on the access to my account, because you wouldn't have my token or my phone or my application that would have enabled you to get into that account. So it's just really, really an effective security tool across the board. And the last real reason to use it is just because it's so easy to use now. So 10 or 15 years ago, using multi-factor authentication, kind of pre-smartphone, required a pretty complex setup, right? Some of you will remember using those RSA tokens, right, that you used to have on your key fob. And those were highly secure. They added that, but now MFA, with the advent of smartphone technology, has just become kind of software for everyone. Because there are apps you can use, whether it's through Google, Microsoft, we'll talk about those in a second, and it can all be done right through your phone, which is just a really great thing because our phones are so well secured. Most of them are using face scanners or fingerprint readers just to get into the phone, so you have biometric there. And then once you're in the phone, you have to then either, again, select a push notification, enter a code, do all these things to give you access to that account. It's just a really, really good habit to get into. And for any of you who maybe don't know how you could use multi-factor, or this is kind of a foreign concept to you, there are plenty of different applications that you can use to do that. So Duo and Okta are both kind of industry leaders on more of the enterprise side. So those are applications you're probably more likely to see in your work environments. There are plenty of others, right? And they're all providing really great service. So these are just two kind of at the top of the industry. And then on the right-hand side, those are Microsoft Authenticator and Google Authenticator. So built right into your Gmail account or into your Microsoft Outlook account is probably the ability to turn on multi-factor authentication. So after you've seen this video, if you aren't using that, I would really, really recommend that you get into that habit and use it just about everywhere you can, right? So your banking accounts, your email accounts, your work accounts. It's just a really great habit to get into, and something I can't recommend enough for all the people watching this video and everyone for that matter. All right, that's all the time we have today on multi-factor authentication. I really hope you learned something. Thanks for coming to the YouTube channel. Hope to have you back here again. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.